And I can't find that one paragraph, but in here, since he was thinking about raising a family, not only is it good for T cells and other immune function, but it builds strength in the sperm count. Well, that's very, very important if you are planning to start a family. Now, Don figures out here that at the time he's, what, 105, his first child will be going to college again, which is a good thing. That's a good goal to have. So let's open it up to questions, and we have a lot of talent in our group. So who would like to go first? Go ahead. And I'll come up to you and I'll give you the microphone. So.
Just want to say that I am a member of the. I just want to say that I take Bone Up, which is a supplement for maintaining your bone, and one of the principal ingredients in it is, one of the principal ingredients in it is zinc. That's all I have to say.
I was wondering if anyone could comment on the New York Times article last week about how vitamin C suppresses antioxidants when they're released in the body from exercise, and at the same time depresses the body's natural mechanisms for dealing with antioxidants. That's a concern for me when taking collagen peptide together with vitamin C, because that's the way you're supposed to do it, but I also exercise. So am I neutralizing natural mechanisms because of the vitamin C or what? So that's a new result. It was just published last week in the New York Times after being published elsewhere. I was wondering if anyone's read that, and if any of our learned experts have comments.
You want to address that?
Well, you're going to be producing free radicals anyway when you're exercising. And
well, I think of myself as a free radical.
I saw that article, but one of the things is the amount of vitamin C you take. One of the things we discussed with Linus when he was alive was the amount was you don't need that much, really. Even 250 milligrams. This Japanese scientific paper has shown that that's all you need. And when you're taking collagen, actually, you're already taking collagen in a collagen form. So really, you're getting collagen value right there without the vitamin C. Vitamin C is also very important in making collagen. So you can always take vitamin C afterwards, you work out, and that's probably going to give you a better protection. And another thing about zinc, it also blocks NF-beta kappa. It's one of the best NF-beta kappa. And a lot of the research was done on zinc gluconate. And I know Roger Gunterson quite a bit, and his ionic zinc is very good, but zinc gluconate also has major publications that you can look at as being one of the effective zincs out there. So just limit the amount of vitamin C. I wouldn't worry about that. It's the other vitamins that you have to look at.
Cool.
And maybe Steve can mention that too, Fowkes.
Well, let me take it as long as we're in the same neighborhood here. My name is Jim. I'm your video guy for those of you that are new, and this will be with Aubrey, our 93rd health video. So as the video guy, I have to tell you, if you're within 10 feet of me, turn off your cell phone completely. Otherwise, it completely wrecks the soundtrack of this thing. Even the CNN's having that car. So thank you very much. And Steve, you? I haven't read the study yet. I talked about vitamin C in general. Here you go.
One of the things that I've understood is that health is heavily mixed with politics in terms of and I don't know what this particular study is about, but it was about, I don't know, 8 years ago, there was a study that was done that said that vitamin C increases DNA damage. And this was picked up and published in Europe and picked up and run all over the United States. All the major news series picked it up and ran with it. And it turns out that there are 4 different kinds of DNA damage, and the study only looked at 2, and only one of them actually causes any damage. And this is the nucleotide that is actually involved in the sensing at the DNA level of oxidative stress. And so, all of this publicity and this hype, scaring people about vitamin C, from a relatively small study where the scientific researchers probably knew that the two things they were looking at, that there were two things they were ignoring, were not damaged by vitamin C, were actually protected by vitamin C. And the fact that none of these researchers and reporters who reported this talked about the fact that vitamin C is used, for example, in animal husbandry to preserve sperm against DNA damage, and had been for, you know, I don't know, 50 years, this kind of thing. So I would just be cautious when you read those kinds of things. And if you want, by all means, send me a link to it so that I can track it down and actually read, and maybe I can report in the next meeting as to actually what the scientific study was. Oh, and the other thing is that technically, any form of salt, zinc or not, when you dissolve it in water, is nano. Even sodium chloride.
Thank you so much, Steve. Any other questions? Oh, here we go.
So I ran across the Wikipedia article on gelatin, which says that the lysine content of gelatin is really actually very low.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering why, when we take gelatin for the obvious benefits or hydrolyzed collagen, why we aren't taking that with also the fortification of some extra lysine. Since according to Palo, lysine is supposed to be like the big thing for preventing and reversing artery disease.
Should I answer that?
Answer it without the microphone.
Well,
Yeah, roughly 30% of the collagen structure uses lysine, and 30% lysine, 30% proline, 30% glycine. But when the proline is hydroxylated and the lysine is hydroxylated, it's no longer proline or glycine or lysine. And so your body can't unhydroxylate hydroxyproline to make it into proline, or so you in a sense have to subtract that from the total protein content. Matthias Rath, who when he put together his vitamin C protocol for heart disease, which is probably working through a collagen mechanism, he emphasized lysine. And since then he's added proline to his list of nutrients. So certainly anytime you have a biological process that is somehow compromised, addressing the bottleneck in that process is a good way to overcome the deficiency in the body and allow the molecules to restore themselves by natural mechanisms. So that's what I would say in terms of the lysine content. It's probably still relatively high. It's just lower than people think, because most people think that somehow hydroxylysine is the same thing as lysine and the body can use it when it can't. Also, a lot of foods have lysine in them. A lot of other foods, whereas proline is actually high in collagen, but very, very low in standard kinds of proteins. So proline, if your body doesn't make it, you may have to supplement it to a much greater extent in terms of risk and management and effectiveness, guaranteeing effectiveness, than you would have to supplement lysine. But, you know, conventional wisdom, be sure and take both.
So hydrolyzed collagen, like in Burns powder, is effectively the same content of those things as gelatin is?
Yes, and beef or turkey or something like that, a high protein food, would have lysine in it. There are, you know, lots of foods that have lysine. I mean, certainly vegetarians have to be concerned. That's one of the amino acids they have to be concerned about. But if you eat a high protein diet, you're probably not deficient in lysine. If you're eating a very low protein diet, that could seriously be an issue. But Americans generally eat about, you know, 4 times more protein than a lot of other people in other cultures, and so you have to eat some pretty imbalanced protein to get to actually induce a kind of quantitative deficiency. In terms of the vitamin C, the vitamin C is used in the maturation of collagen. So the proline, glycine, and lysine, which are about 90% of the structure, are produced into collagen at the cellular level in something called pre-procollagen, which is then excreted from the cell and then matured into collagen. It's or procollagen, and it's assembled into long lattices and stuff, and then cross-linked into place, and then hydroxylated to maximize its water solubility and water carrying capacity. Like hyaluronic acid that can carry about 100 times its weight in water. Collagen has that same kind of thing, because if it's wet, the collagen in your systems, the molecules slide past each other. If it dries out, then it's like, sandpaper. And so keeping your collagen hydrated is a very, very important part of its function and structure, and the lack of irritation that it might cause your body. And so if your vitamin C is substandard, or your copper, or your iron, or your silica are substandard, which would be involved in the hydroxylation reactions that are creating this water solubility in the collagen, then your collagen may not be fully hydrated, and your immune system may, or your body's repair mechanism may look at that immature collagen and say, this is a sign of old collagen or malfunctioning collagen, and build enzymes to go in and attack it to replace it, to fix it, but it replaces it with collagen that's already equally immature, and so your body's in a state of constant high turnover to try to fix the collagen, and you end up with osteoporosis or heart disease. So, taking collagen precursors to feed the system and taking vitamin C, a quarter gram, half a gram, 3-4 times a day, is more than enough to saturate those collagen maturation mechanisms. So it doesn't take that much. But, I mean, how many people know if you're silica deficient? Copper deficiency. I mean, Tom might want to share something about copper, is that 2 types of copper deficiency, one of which is dietary and the other which is induced by your immune system. So given the amount of inflammation we have in our population, people walking around, you could have a copper deficiency even consuming 5 milligrams of copper a day. It just gets stored in your liver instead of being made bioavailable to the tissues of your body.
Yes, and you can certainly worsen that condition by taking zinc.
Yes.
Because the absorptive protein in the ileum is metallothionease, and it both binds copper and zinc. So if you saturate the system with zinc, you don't get copper. Don't get copper in. Secondly, I think it was David Milner when we had Letterman Army Hospital here in the Presidio years ago. When I think it was David Milner or David Milne, he fed rhesus monkeys 3 grams of copper, 3 grams of vitamin C a day, and in 6 months they died from aortic ruptures. Mechanism: copper deficiency. Ascorbate will reduce copper to copper 1, and it's not absorbable by metallothionease.
Yeah.
So these are some issues that have to be thought through before one supplements willy-nilly.
I have one more thing on copper there. Before I did video about 20 years ago, I videotaped Dr. Richard Cunyon. He talked for 2 hours about copper. I didn't know there was that much to know about copper. But he mentioned in that, he said, if you're taking high doses of vitamin C, for example, you will need 2 of the little 4 milligram copper sabacate little tablets there you get through ecological formulas out of Concord.
Well, almost
sabacate.
any form of copper will do. They dissociate. It's the copper ion that's absorbed. You don't absorb it as copper sabacate or any other form. Copper is extremely labile, and so it will dissociate from whatever it's bound to, and metallothionease then binds it, pulls it in.
Oh, okay. Well, it's more than I knew there, I'll tell you. So it's bound to glutathione as well. That was the other factor with this type of copper. Okay, thanks.
And zinc does too.
Zinc, okay.
Yeah. I would also suggest that the myth that copper bracelets don't work is wrong. So the transdermal copper is absorbed in some people who have this type of immune system induced copper deficiency. The copper bracelets and copper cream, the topical copper, do help treat those symptoms.
And it bypasses the gut?
Bypasses the liver.
In fact, it was the doctor in Africa there, Albert Schweitzer, I believe it was, went to these tribes, and everybody else, after having introduced the refined foods, the white flour and sugar and all that sort of thing, they had an epidemic in the tribes of arthritis. But this one tribe had absolutely no arthritic problems whatsoever. And the one thing he noted as he was leaving their village, and they adorned him with all this beautiful copper jewelry. It was from all the high-line telegraph lines that they tore down to make them jewelry. And nobody had arthritis, so there's a connection there for sure.
Very good. So, Don, would you like to introduce our next short?
Certainly. Oh, sure.
Do you remember who that was?
Yes, I actually, I flew in this afternoon from Italy, from Rome, and I had my nutritionist, Michelle Reese, pick me up at the airport because my job this evening, and I'd forgotten all about it, was to introduce Steve here, and he's already given his talk, so I don't know why. Because about 20 hours ago I was married, but I'd like to go into the background because I was married very late in life, and the first lady, lovely lady that I met was a friend of Mike Corrick's, and he introduced me to her. and basically, I went to Steve and I said, Steve, I want to be nutritionally supplement. Now, as you correct, so Steve has his Smart Drug News, which he's been doing for many, many years, which is absolutely outstanding. And if you don't have it, you should have it. And he gave me a wedding present on my first wedding of what he calls a brick. Now, that's 15 years of work that he has, and it's very well worth having. And we're having a real stud horse deal on it tonight for $50, and it's worth seeing. But actually, Steve said, well, I asked him, I said, Steve, I have to be nutritionally perfect. And he really laid it out, and he gave me one of his things here, and I read it with great interest. And my God, the interesting thing is my wife gave me two absolutely beautiful, over a few years' time, absolutely beautiful daughters. And then we had our third child, and I looked at it and I said, and unfortunately, it was the ugliest child I'd ever laid my eyes on. It was a boy. The ugliest child I'd ever laid my eyes on. And I said, honey, I said, what is going on? Have you been fooling around on me? And she said, not this time. It was very tragic, and it was the end of that first marriage. So then I came back, I explained it all to Mike, and I said, Mike, we have a real problem here. I said, she was a lovely lady, but something went wrong. And he said, okay, Don, I have somebody for you. And I said, all right, Mike, let's give it another try. And so he introduced me to this lady, and she was a very, very attractive lady. She was oversexed, okay? She reminded me, well, of the women from Peoria, Illinois, you know? I cured venereal disease, as you remember. Yeah, you remember it, Peoria, Illinois. That was my specialty, curing venereal disease. And so, as a result of this, it was a very interesting marriage, and I said, Mike, I think that there's something, she's a little bit weird, and I said, can you help me? And I explained a little something. He said, Don, he says, you know, I'm thinking of becoming a psychologist. And I said, well, that's interesting, but that's not your field. You're in the electronics field. He says, that's true, but I'm thinking of becoming a psychologist. And he says, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make you a present. He said, anytime the sex gets a little kinky and weird, I want you to have your phone sitting right there so that you can immediately dial me, and all you have to do is ring the bell. I said, well, that sounds like a pretty good idea, because as you know, Mike, I'm thinking of becoming religious, and I don't want this to carry on too far. So we're there one evening, and things are getting a little bit out of hand. I felt my body was being violated, so I hit the speed dial, and I went like this, and Mike says, "What's going on?" I said, "Mike, I'm trying to explain." He says, "I'll be right over." He was just down the block. Okay? So within about 18 or 20 seconds, he's there. And I'm asking him, I said, "My God, Mike, what's going on?" He says, "I'd like to watch." Well, that's a little strange. And I said, "Is this normal procedure?" He says, "Well, that's what they tell me, because in all of my psychiatric studying," he says, "that I find that most psychologists, all they want to do is watch people have sex." I said, "I didn't know that." I said, "Does it pay well?" And he said, "Well, I'm not sure yet whether it pays well or not." Well, unfortunately, when we got through with this vile act, okay, she stood up, Mike stood up and gave her a standing ovation. All right? When I stood up, nothing. The next day, my wife said, "Well," she said, "I am going to divorce you." And I said, "What is the cause? For what reason?" She said, "Well, you saw last night that Mike gave me a standing ovation. You received zilch." She says, "I'm thinking of becoming a lesbian." And I said, "Well, there's another marriage." So I said, "Okay, Mike, call a group of people together, and if you would mind, this time I want a professional lady." Okay? And he said, "Well, I think I may know just the person. She's 2 or 3 years younger than you." I said, "How old is she?" He said, "She's 28. Now, this is a woman that I married here in Rome, literally about 24 hours. And this is supposed to be our wedding night, but I came back to you, Steve. Every time I get married, Steve gives me another one of these things. He gives me one on Depernell that allows me to live to be 126 years old. He gives me one on testosterone for obvious reasons. And I keep studying all of these things and seeing what literally is going on. And then I check with my doctor, Dr. Phil Miller, and he gives me testosterone, and he gives me this, and he's always testing my urine. This marriage is a very difficult proposition. And so, but you know, I felt that actually Mike is kind of the, Joey Buttafuoco of the West Coast. So I went back to him, I said, "Okay, I want a professional woman this time, Mike." And he said, "Okay." He said, "This girl is wonderful. She's a professional in the business world." I said, "What does she do?" He said, she does handbags. She produces, designs, and manufactures handbags. I said, "Well, you can buy those things for $9. And he said, "No, now today they're $1,500, $1,600. I said, "Oh my God, that's great." I said, "Has she always done this?" He said, "No, she did a couple of other things." I said, "What else did she do?" He said, "She was a lap dancer at one time." I said, "Lap dancer?" And I said, "Oh my God, Mike." I said, "I'm not sure that I can take this." But anyway, we were married yesterday. They had a great big festivity. Lots of people. There were people in this room. She'd been over there for a few weeks. So who happened to be in the crowd was President Clinton. Now, he was down in Monterey here about 12 or 14 years ago, and my son was caddying for him at a golf tournament, and I went up to him and I said, "Mr. President," I said, "I met you about a dozen years ago. My son caddied for you." He says, "Oh yes, I remember." And I said, "I'd like to introduce you to my wife." So he turns around, my wife's behind him. He turns around, I said, "This is my wife, Mrs. Southern." And he said, "Oh, I know Miss Lewinsky." And so, I don't follow politics very closely. And I said, no, Mrs. Southern, not Mrs. Lewinsky. And he says, "Oh, yeah." So I flew back, arrived today. Michelle was kind enough to pick me up at the airport. And I called her and I said, "Okay, just as soon as I introduce Steve, I'm back on the plane, I'm back." She says, "Don't bother, there's no hurry." I said, "Well, this is our wedding night." She said, "Oh, there's no problem at all as far as that's concerned, because I'm going to see the Pope here tomorrow." And she says, I'm looking for some religious stuff and of that sort. And so basically I came back and I talked to Phil this afternoon, and I talked to Dr. Phil Miller, and I talked to Steve, I talked to Mike, and they said, "Don, you know what you ought to do? You ought to get a dog." So you ought to get a dog, so perhaps I'm going to go out and get another basset hound. But anyway, let me say this as far as Steve is concerned, that this man has done, this worthless individual over here has probably done more than anything else. We have this wonderful book called Smart Drugs too. And anytime I ever see anybody, I'm always producing things out of this and giving it to them. So Steve, if you want to come up and ruin other people's lives the way you ruin mine, come on over.
Wow.
Think we can follow that?
Now for the serious part of the program.
We have 3 minutes left.
I told him to prepare for tonight to introduce me, and I even insulted him earlier to really get him up to the challenge, and I had no idea what I was doing. Okay. Memory problems. Who here has memory problems? Okay, so about half of you are dishonest. Yeah. I was talking to a potential client, maybe it was yesterday, and one of the things that I thought I'd start with that I think is very important when you're facing the issue of losing your mind and losing your memory is the issue of fear. This man was having serious problems, and he was so afraid of what was going on that he wouldn't call me. He wouldn't call anybody. He wouldn't talk to his doctor. And yet, after talking with me for 20 minutes, maybe it was 30 minutes, he had a totally different attitude about it. And so I guess the biggest message I'd like to get across is that memory problems are not an invariant consequence of aging, that these are influenced by things that you have control over, and that if you want to resolve your memory problems, you can approach the problem systematically and do that. And there are certain things that you need to know, but on the whole, you don't necessarily need to know which of the things that you're going to try are necessarily going to be the first horse out of the gate. So, to some extent, you can just flip a coin and try different things that may be involved in memory and see if they work for you. Of course, there's always a big problem that sometimes we really can't tell that our memory isn't doing very well. I think that you have to lose basically 30% of your cognitive processing abilities before you start to get a glimmer that something's not quite right. And that, therefore, when you're faced with incremental loss of memory through the aging process, you know, it's like at some point you kind of wake up and go, something happens, and you go, well, it didn't used to be that way. But there's a lot of things like that that happen with aging. I used to be able to stay up all night. I used to be able to run the 50-yard dash in 10 seconds. I used to weigh 40 pounds less than I do now. These kinds of things. And so that the issue of what you notice is sometimes more about the context than it is about your actual function. In other words, if you forget somebody's name in the middle of an introduction, it's like really, really embarrassing, and therefore that's much worse than forgetting your driver's license when you're at the store or something like that. Just so that you know that I understand, given how young I am, about 15 years ago I developed senility. I couldn't remember what happened 5 minutes ago. If I read a paragraph, by the time I got to the end of it, I couldn't remember what the beginning of the paragraph was about. I couldn't go from the kitchen to the garage to find a screwdriver because I'd forget that I was looking for a screwdriver. And it turned out that my problem was a coagulopathy. I had 2 simultaneous fungal infections, one of which I knew about, the other one which I didn't. And the combination of those sensitized my immune system such that my blood got very, very, very thick. And so my brain wasn't perfused properly, and it went to lunch. If I had known then, you know, what I know now, I would have gone out to the health food store and bought nattokinase and just taken it. So what I did is I struggled for a while to try to figure out how to deal with this, you know, talking with my wife and eventually getting in touch with Richard Cunyon in San Francisco, who was mentioned honorably earlier. And he did a test on me, which I spent $650 on, not only plus the medical costs. So 3 weeks later, you know, still with memory problems, I got the diagnosis. I had a coagulopathy, and so I went out and bought nattokinase and started taking it. 2 days later, my brain was normal. So,
Could you spell some of these words for us?
nattokinase is N-A-T-T-O, which is a fermented Japanese food made with soybeans that looks kind of like somebody sneezed into a pile of soybeans. And kinase, or kinase, depending upon, you know, if you mispronounce it like I do, it's kinase, but kinase is K-I-N-A-S-E. And you can now find this at most health food stores. Whole Foods, for example. And so if you have a coagulation problem, this is a solution. This is a very focused solution. But how many people out there with memory problems have, you know, coagulopathy is the underlying problem? Well, and is that applicable to you? Well, the answer to that question is, would you rather spend $650 to get a test, or would you rather spend 20 or 30 bucks at the health food store and just take it for 2 days or a week and see if your problem goes away? And that's what I would suggest as a viable solution to all kinds of memory problems, is just try something and see if it works. Now, when you have such a severe problem as I did, of not being able to remember what happened 5 minutes ago, it's very easy to tell when your memory problem goes away. You know, but in terms of having subtle differences, how can you tell? Well, the answer is you do memory tests on yourself. And this is the hardest thing about solving your memory problem, is actually doing some kind of memory assessment testing. It's much harder than taking supplements. It's much harder than exercising. It's much harder, I mean, you have to actually change your habits. But if you do that, if you do measure your memory, a good example of something that's dirt cheap would be the game of concentration. How many people played concentration when you were a kid? Yeah, normally you play it with 2 people, you shuffle the cards, spread them out on the table face down, you take turns, turning 2 of them over. If they pair up, you take them off the table, they're yours. And then the next person takes the turn. And so if they turn over a 3 and you turned over a 3 the previous time, if they remembered where that 3 was, they pair it up and get it off the table. So it's your short and medium term memory to remember where those cards are. Well, instead of playing against somebody else, you play against yourself. You have a stopwatch. You click it, you do it until the table's cleared, and then you measure your time. How long does it take you to clear the table? That's an example of something that anybody can do. And all it takes is your time. And of course, some degree of discipline to actually do it. So if you're actually doing this on a daily basis, you can watch your scores to say, well, what happens when I eat beef or don't eat beef, or take vitamin C or don't take vitamin C, or exercise and don't exercise? Is my score different in the morning as it is in the evening? If I take testosterone, does it change my score? Anything that you do in your lifestyle at that point in time, when you're doing this testing, you can immediately assess, is this a good thing or a bad thing regarding your memory problem? I mean, this is not really rocket science. Now, maybe it's rocket science to make a guess out of the hundreds of supplements and hundreds of potential toxic agents in your life that could be affecting your memory. Which one is the one that's going to be the magic bullet for you? But on some level, there could be 10 things that are involved. And each time you figure something out, like, for example, dietary supplements. You walk into a health food store, take a memory formula. You buy a memory formula. What's it going to have in it? Well, DMAE, choline, ginkgo, huperzine A. Most of these things work by stimulating acetylcholine in your brain, but you'll have a strong improvement in your memory scores for a day, or maybe a week. but by 2 weeks and a month, chances are you're back to baseline again. So with this kind of testing, you can offset that first experience, which consumers really judge. They buy this product and they take it and they go, wow. And then they keep buying and keep taking it, even though it's no longer working. Okay, so by doing some kind of constant assessment, you're able to make those kinds of judgments. What is sustainable in terms of your memory improvement? So this would be like going to the gym and working out, where you can say, I can do 12 reps at 100 pounds on a curl, and then all of a sudden you can only do, 8 reps. Okay, something's wrong. Oh, I just started taking help me out here, cholesterol blocker. Statin. Okay. There was a senior moment right there. And so you can say, okay, I take a statin and now my strength is down or my stamina is down. You can then say, okay, maybe that's not a smart decision. And you can make that decision in a week or a month instead of, 6 months or a year, expecting that your doctor is going to tell you that answer when the doctor is the one who actually prescribed it to you. In terms of memory, there's all kinds of processes that take place that are essential. I'm going to mention another one, which is universal and relatively cheap to do, and that's ketosis, where instead of dealing with memory in terms of neurotransmitters and neurological organization function, you're dealing with energy production in the neuron. And it turns out this is a big deal, that if you have insulin resistance and you're on a high complex carbohydrate diet, you can have memory problems because your brain can't utilize sugar as well as it otherwise could. Other things that could be involved, but if you do a ketosis program and you change your diet and you drop your carbohydrate percentage down so that your body starts generating ketones that flow through your entire body and flow to your brain, after about 2 weeks, your brain is able to use those ketones efficiently, and your memory problem may go away. This is an example of something that is, it's not about taking supplements so much, it's about changing your lifestyle, like exercise, where, moving your blood around is a way of improving oxygenation of your brain and your body. This is a way of enhancing the energy metabolism at the cellular level. As we get older and we develop insulin resistance, syndrome X, and have all these other problems, you can look at your brain as an early warning sign about what's going wrong. The fact that you can't remember is telling you that something is going wrong before it's affecting your organs and the rest of your body. On some levels, your brain is way more sensitive. A 30% drop in your brain metabolism, you're unconscious. 30% drop in your heart function, you're walking around like normal. So the brain tells you that something's going wrong. And so, my message would be, use your brain as a biofeedback device. Connect yourself through your brain and let your brain tell you what it is that you need. What makes your brain work better, what may not make your brain work better, what may make it work worse, so that you can make very intelligent decisions about your health and welfare. Now I'd like to open it up for questions. If anybody wants to ask something that's specific to a particular issue, now's the time.
What do you think of use of lumbokinase versus nattokinase? And what do you think about dopamine breaks? And what do you think about Bacopa break?
The first question, I can't really answer any of those questions based on personal experience. But lumbokinase can certainly address coagulopathies. If you want to do it in less than 2 days, you can also go to your doctor and beg, borrow, or steal some heparin and pop some sublingual heparin under your tongue and see if that reverses your cognitive function in about 15 to 30 minutes. So there are ways of intervening this with medical assistance and all, in addition to that. But the issue of, for example, I've known many people, especially middle-aged and older, who when they take Deprinyl, which raises their energy metabolism, it causes increase in steroid synthesis, growth hormone, drives, stamina, for men, sex drive. And here's a testament to this, the application of Deprinyl here. But this has resulted in some people having dramatic improvements in memory. And so if there is an issue with dopamine in your brain that is affecting your memory or your motivation or your neuroendocrine system, taking Deprinyl can address that question. And there are herbs that can do that same issue, and you can take fava beans and velvet beans as a precursor for dopa to raise your dopa that way. And if you take fava beans, and if you're going to notice something from dopamine, it's going to be 3 to 6 hours. So this isn't something that necessarily takes a week of your time. Some of these things can be, you can get a message in minimal amount of time. My experience with nattokinase was, 2 days. I was fully capable of remembering everything and doing that I could before. But I took 4 capsules of nattokinase a day for those 2 days. And so most people who would be less desperate than I was at that time might have gone 1 capsule, and then 2, and then 3, and then 4, and therefore might have taken up to a week. So, this certainly matters on how aggressive you are and how desperate you are in terms of getting your answer.
What about Deprinyl breaks?
I've taken Deprinyl breaks, and I don't notice much from them at all. It's like paracetam, the same thing. I take a break with paracetam, I don't really notice anything at all, other than some abilities that I get from paracetam will kind of go away in terms of my multitasking ability, for example. It'll disappear in maybe a day. But in terms of Deprinyl and its neuroendocrine benefits, it takes 3 months for those to fade away. They're very long term. They don't happen right away. You get dopamine raised, but the feedback effect on dopamine on the hypothalamus can build up over 3 months and then take 3 months to decline as well. Some of this is seen in another supplement involved in anxiety in college students taking exams. Anybody remember the anxiety of taking exams? Yeah, well, there's a supplement that is based on fermented fish that they still don't know how it works, but on a double-blind, placebo-controlled, crossover design study, the group taking the supplement had decreased anxiety and were more at ease with test taking. But the interesting thing was that they did the crossover design after only 1 week washout, and that wasn't enough. That the placebo group still maintained resistance to anxiety almost to the end of the study. So there can be these kinds of effects that some of the things you take may be short-term and some things may be cumulative. And so that's one of the challenges involved in trying to figure this out. But at least if you're monitoring yourself and you can see these changes as they're happening, you can say, well, is this what I did yesterday? Or is this from what I did last week? Or is it from something that something else?
What was that supplement you were just talking about?
It was called Stabilium at the time, but it was also known as garum back in the days of the Romans. It was developed in, I believe it was northwestern France a long, long time ago. There may be other brands out there now, but the study was actually done with a product called Stabilium. And, yes?
Can you relate the subject of brain chemistry that you've been discussing and the presence of the thyroid disorder, sort of where you have to take Synthroid in order to get the right amount of thyroid function?
Yeah, I would say that that's an example like ketosis of an energy-based memory problem.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's really true, and that would not just be thyroid hormone, but adrenal hormone and sex hormones all play a role in the regulation of energy. So you can damage the system by eating a lot of carbohydrate, overeating carbohydrate, but you can also damage the system by some other kind of pathology that may undermine your thyroid hormone, or, for example, by taking Synthroid, which is only T4, and you can develop thyroid resistance from the T4 accelerating the conversion to reverse T3. So anybody taking T4 as a monotherapy needs to have the reverse T3 measured. And I've talked to hundreds of clients over decades, and that's not part of standard medical practice. So this is part of the issue of being a smart consumer that when you know that something should be done, that you just don't accept that your doctor won't do that service for you when it's absolutely necessary that you do it. Mike can tell some good stories about some very unexpected benefits from taking thyroid hormone, and one of the consequences that was associated with his experience with T4 monotherapy, which then changed when he started adding a T3, T4 mixture to his program. And so my suggestion is always to people, even though there's 2 drugs that I use on a daily lifestyle basis that I consider to be health enhancing, is that when you're in doubt, trust Mother Nature. And Mother Nature does not produce synthroid. Mother Nature does not produce isolated T4. It's always producing a mixture of T4, T3, T2, and T1, and that these other hormones have influence in the feedback mechanisms that are regulating your energy pathways. So, but I would certainly say that anybody who has amotivational symptoms should look at their thyroid status, particularly if you have sleeping problems, a tendency towards constipation, cold body temperature, poor peripheral circulation, depression. Anybody else offer a symptom?
Breaking nails.
Breaking nails.
Dry skin.
Osteoporosis.
Cold hands and feet.
Yeah, I mentioned.
Oh, you haven't said
And Terry Hertog would tell you her cuts.
No.
Sitting out of the number, right?
Okay, so that it's like saying, okay, if you're looking at the brain, what does the brain need? You need circulation. You need air coming through your lungs, and you need to carry away the CO2 that your brain is producing. You need to have tryptophan to make serotonin, and dopamine to make, L-dopa to make dopamine. You need to have certain neurotransmitters. You need to have certain consistency in your membranes. So, for example, some people will have seizures because their membranes become rigid and lack of permeability in your membranes. Paracetam, which is now over the counter as a smart drug, normalizes membrane fluidity in people in 2 days. So you don't necessarily have to take an anti-epileptic drug or Dilantin to investigate that question about your membrane rigidity. You can just, test yourself and see, does it get better? Paracetam. It's a smart drug that was invented in Europe in, the 60s? Something like that. It is approved there. It's the treatment of choice for myoclonic seizure disorder in children and infants. And if a doctor does not prescribe it for that, in England they lose their license. In the United States, if they do prescribe it, they lose their license.
Steve, excellent in your book. Outstanding book. Right
Chapter on paracetam. That's it. So now, when I was taking paracetam years ago, I paid $350 a kilo from paracetam from a compounding pharmacy. So that would last me maybe 10 months. Okay. Now I can get that same amount of paracetam for less than 50 bucks. As a dietary supplement, I get mine from Beyond a Century, but there are other companies that sell it. And so the price of paracetam is, less than a coffee habit. Membrane fluidizing. But it doesn't over-fluidize your membranes like a lot of the anti-epileptic drugs like Dilantin. You take too much, you have cognitive dysfunction effects. It adversely affects your memory. So that's why a lot of people with seizure disorders who are over-medicated have real problems, children in schools, is because of that effect of over-fluidization of membranes. Yes?
Can you comment on the other paracetam?
I can't. On some levels, you might look at me and say I'm a flaming radical because I've tried all these things and experimented with it. But in the racetam family, I've only tried paracetam. So that's an example of conservatism in action. I found something I really like, and because there's 4 times double the bandwidth of data on it, and it's twice as in depth, there's much in depth, and because there isn't an incentive for the drug companies doing competing Me Too drugs to withhold information, I trust paracetam, hands down over the other racetams. But I know quite a few people who have tried them and have favorites that are above paracetam. I've just never gotten around to doing that. Yes?
How about phenylparacetam specifically, as your kind of paracetam, but with the phenyl attached to it?
Increasing the fat solubility of the compound seems to make a difference in terms of its lifespan in the body and all. But I haven't tried it, so I can't say that it duplicates the effect. But,
It's much stronger, like
Yeah, I mean, certainly because I'm one of us that is testosterone challenged, or testosterone poisoned, if you want, if you prefer. I have the same problem that a lot of men do of having a diminished corpus callosum. In other words, the bundle of fibers in my brain that connects my left and right side of the brain is smaller than it is in women, which is why I don't have multitasking capabilities without paracetam, and why my verbal abilities and writing skills are relatively weak compared to my spatial skills. When it's been measured twice by professionals, it's a 20-point difference. So this is not just a trivial amount of difference. But when I take paracetam, my multitasking abilities just turn on, and I can be doing an editing project and make 5 edits at once, rearrange all these paragraphs, and keep track all these segue problems, keep track of them while I'm working on them. And somebody can call me on the phone, and I will not forget where I was. I can't do that without paracetam. So for me, that is invaluable because I'm a writer. I earn my living partially by writing. But you know, for women, that issue, if it's already a natural part of your skill set, that may not be as attractive. I used to say, before I was corrected by somebody in this group here, that Deprenyl was mainly for middle-aged and older men in terms of enhancing their sex drive. And then I had some woman say, oh no, it's not just men. So there's a lot of crossover effects. I mean, I remember one television show where somebody made a comment about women taking Viagra, and some man laughed at it. And I think we have a lot of that kind of prejudice. And so, you know, when you're getting your hormones measured, for example, we talked about testosterone and thyroid hormone as examples affecting your energy. Well, estrogen is the off switch for your energy. But the average doctor thinks, at least the AMA doctor, you know, the standard orthodox doctor, is that estrogen is a female hormone. How many people have heard that concept? Yeah, well, it turns out it's not. Estrogen is the off hormone for both men and women. And it's not unusual for older men to have higher estrogens than their wives. And it's not at all that dangerous, and not that uncommon at all. It's actually common. And because estrogen's turning off your energy switch, this can cause memory problems. And because estrogen production increases when you have inflammation, it increases when you have infection, it increases when you're exposed to allergens, measuring your estrogen over time makes good sense as part of your program to investigate what's going on with your memory.
What do you do to turn it down?
Well, the brute force approach is an aromatase inhibiting drug that just, 24 hours later your estrogen is down and your testosterone is up. But this is a difficult challenge from the perspective of saying, assuming that you have some kind of inflammatory event in your life, well, where's it coming from? This is, alternative doctors, sweat this detail all the time. This is a difficult challenge to track all this stuff down. And so I can't say that I have a formula for it, but certainly looking at something like food allergies would be something that's widely unaddressed, or taking small amounts of zinc with meals to reduce gut permeability, or looking at the role of your air quality in terms of dust and exposure like that. You could try taking digestive enzymes with your meals to see if the degree of digestion of your meal has a positive effect on your memory. So these are all examples of relatively low-tech things, but it makes perfect sense. If you're not digesting your food properly, you can enhance it and see, does this actually make a difference?
I'd just like to add to what you were just saying about allergies, that some allergies happen to you instantly, but other allergies hit you 3 or 4 days later, so you could be having an allergic reaction to something that you took today, 3 days from now, and your brain goes away. So in some sense, it's also important to track what's in your diet over a period of time and look back and see if there might be something that is compounding the issue.
Yeah, and it can actually be up to 6 to 8 days. The delayed hypersensitivity reactions are up to 6 to 8 days, and so this is the real problem is that this is something that you have to solve by record keeping. I mean, how many people can automatically connect an event that happens a day later, let alone 3 days later. I mean, it's very, very difficult. Yes.
There's another thing you can do. You mentioned heparin earlier. If you're having the problem with food allergies there, heparin can help deal with that as well. So if you suspect it's a delayed food allergy, I had a problem. I had the same kind of brain stuff, fungal associated that you had a while back, going through a similar process. I also had a food problem. So heparin will make the allergic thing go down in low dose. So if you take that, you'll probably notice if you feel a lot better right then, you can see, well, is it because I now have blood in my brain? Or is it because I dealt with the food allergy? Because food allergies will cause that hypocoagulation. So I think that that's probably a quick and dirty way to short circuit that, and then do the food diary.
Yeah,
That's what I did.
it's, you know, there can be multiple causes. It turns out that food allergy produces inflammation that turns on the aromatase enzyme that makes estrogen, and estrogen is a pro-coagulant. And so these things are not necessarily unrelated to each other. And so you may actually find that by taking iodine, for example, which has been discussed in this group, that can lower the influence of your estrogen on the coagulation index, so you feel better. But you don't necessarily know exactly why you're feeling better, but on some level, who cares? You know, I mean, on some level, you just want to be better, and you want to preserve your memory problems. And later you can figure it out. Yes.
Yes. Years ago, many years ago, you recommended Deprinyl, and I loved it. And some guy in Florida made it, and then he stopped. What Deprinyl do you take now?
I take Deprinyl made by Cytopharma de Mexico.
It's called Deprinyl?
It's called Celapril or Cipronil. Cipronil. Yeah, there's two brands down there, and one of them paid the federales to bust the other one. I can't remember which one was which.
Right. Starting with Cipronil with a C.
Yeah. Yeah, Cipronil with a C. And that was the company that also counterfeited the Deprinyl made by the man in Florida, and it was 50% contaminated in amphetamine. And that's the same company that when they put their final version together, they used the wrong dropper. So instead of being 1 drop per milligram, it was 1 drop per 1.5 milligrams, so the dose was miscalibrated, and they did that for an entire year.
You're talking about the one that they put out of business or the one you buy from?
The one you buy from. So they actually put out the better company. They put the better company out of business. But the Deprinyl is okay. I don't know if it has a contaminant in it. I can't tell. I'm typically very sensitive to these kinds of things. So I can't tell. But that's the one that I use now that the Discovery product is available.
Well, you're not too, you helped to ruin my life, Steve. But we have this magnificent
3
book.
wives, all because of me.
All because of you. We have Steve's magnificent book, and it is magnificent, okay? Smart Drugs 2. And we have 15 years of his letters here. Everybody should have it, and it's $50. This stuff is absolutely outstanding. Very readable, very interesting. Many of you have it, but those of you who do not, okay? You're beautiful. Okay.
The Mexican company?
No, it's not. CYTO means cell, and pharma means drug. I don't know how to find them necessarily. I mean, you call up information and talk to them if you can get through the Mexican phone service. But typically there are companies that operate on the California, down in San Ysidro, that actually, their employees actually smuggle it across the border.
Steve,
So
I have
you
it
can actually,
compounded right in Pacific Grove by
yeah, that's true. I mean, you can have it compounded.
Compounded doctor.
But, you know, it's a different source. You don't necessarily know the issue of quality. The people who compound it will not tell you where it comes from.
And this is the Cipronil or the Deprinyl?
It's Deprinyl. It's a generic name. Cipronil is a brand name. And the other alternative brand generic name is Selegiline. There are 3 prescription brands approved in the United States. So if you have medical insurance, get your doctor to prescribe it. It'll be covered by your insurance. Okay, so that can make it cheaper than anything else. But if you want to import the liquid stuff from Mexico, what you can do is risk your money by going on the internet and trying to find out what the company of the month is in the San Ysidro area, and get your money in and get the Deprinyl before the Fed shut them down. And so every 4 to 6 months, the company turns over and a new one is formed. It's just this constant game that they play with the regulators to get the Mexican product into the United States where they can send it directly to you without customs interference. So there's always that possibility.
Okay.
That's what I